Hi there VC, it's Steve Whitty here. It's Sunday morning. It's time for another video. I hope everybody's good. You've all had a good week. Mine's been good. Yeah, it's been as good as it can be in these circumstances. Though on Wednesday we did have a VC UK meetup on Zoom, which was great. It's always an entertaining way of spending a couple of hours just chatting about music and any old rubbish in general. Also, I want to just give a quick shout out, Chris Barron. I hope you're feeling better. I hope if you're watching this, I hope all's well with you. So today's video is a response video. Couple of weeks ago, maybe a week and a half ago, James Griffiths posted a video called Classic Mid-Table Albums. I think that's right. Yeah, classic mid-table albums, where he showed albums from bands that were good but not great. It is classed as their best albums, and I said to James when I replied, I'd give some serious thought to this. I think Vinyl Orchard has done one. I haven't seen any others post these videos, but hey ho. So without further ado, I'll pick 10 albums, and probably and they are by well-known acts, as befit this the video. So before I go any further, because I can feel my throat drying up already, let's have some tea. So first album, AC/DC, Razor's Edge, which came out in 1991. Not up there with Back in Black and some of the classics of the Bon Scott era, but it was a definite improvement on some of the 80s albums like Flick of the Switch, Fly on the Wall, and Blow Up Your Video, and there was some really good tracks. The opening lead single, Thunderstruck, absolutely great. Money Talks, Razor's Edge, Are You Ready? Really good tracks on this, and some really up there, and they're up there with some classic AC/DC, and the rest of the album actually makes it still a good album. I don't think there's any really duff track. I mean, I can even take Mistress of Christmas on here, as we're coming up to Christmas. But yes, that I would say is what I would call a classic mid-table album. Next, Genesis and their self-titled album from 1983. And it's a good album. I think it was a definite improvement on Abacab. And you've got Mama on there, which was the lead single, and you got Home on by the Sea, which is probably their last classic long track. You got some of the singles like That's All and Legal Alien. Yeah, I think it's a really good album. Not up there with the sort of classics, but I think it's as albums go, this is really quite a good one. There are worse albums in the Genesis catalogue. Next up, I've gone for Kiss, Rock and Roll Over. Came out 1976, I believe. This sort of was more back to basics, follow up to Destroyer. You have got some great songs on here, some classic Kiss songs that have been staples of the live show: Heart Look Woman, Making Love, I Want You, Calling Dr. Love, Ladies Room. And the rest of the tracks make it a good one, but it's not up there, I don't think, with these sort of classics like the debut album, Destroyer. I even prefer The Elder to this, but if you saw my video last week, you saw my defence on that one. But it's just a classic rock song. I mean, they've made worse albums than this. I think Love Gun is a worse album than this, in my view. And I would even say Dress to Kill is not as good as this, but yeah, this is to me just a good solid album. Next, Motorhead, and this is Another Perfect Day, which came out in 1983. This was the album that featured Brian Robertson on guitar. And as to me, it was a definite improvement on Iron Fist. Iron Fist was sounded so inconsistent. Its production was poor, and it was. And you listen to it now, an album you could hear the band breaking up. What Brian Robertson brought musically was some fresh ideas. He started using the Roland guitar synth as well, which sort of changed the sound. But the big difference here is the songs were better. Again, it's not up there as classic but you can't compare it to Bomber, Overkill, and Ace of Spades. But it's a good, solid album. I think it was initially dismissed at the time, and I think half the problem wasn't the music; it was the fact that Brian Robertson was turned up playing, looking like Mr. Motivator or some gym instructor with the headband and shorts or whatever, and which sort of went against the grain with how Lemmy and Phil Taylor looked. And I don't think the fans really took to it, and he didn't last long, to be honest, which was a shame. Because I think if they could have carried on with that musically on that level, things might have been different. But it still made some good albums. It's definitely by far not the weakest album in their back catalogue. It's a good solid album. I think you got Dancing on Your Grave, my favourite track on here. Another Perfect Day, Tales of Glory, and you got ends with Die You Bastard, which is but it's a good solid Motorhead album. It was a return to form. Not great, but it was a good solid return to form. Good grief. It's what happens when you do a video early in the morning. Next, Ramones, Road to Ruin. The band's fourth album and the first album to feature Marky on drums. And again, it's not comparable to like the first three albums, but you've got here you've got their version of Needles and Pins, I Want to Be Sedated. You don't Come Close, I think it's just a great song on here. But somehow this sounded like the sort of like the rougher edges were starting to be smoothed off a little bit from the band. But it's better than End of the Century in my opinion. I don't really know much about the 80s stuff. I'm sort of like comparing it to really the first three albums. But it's a good album. Don't get me wrong, it's a good album. I don't think there's but I just don't think it's quite up there with it classic. So to me, that's what makes a good, as James would put it, mid-table album. This might raise some eyebrows, particularly as it's just recently hit number one in the UK number one in the album charts thanks to its reissue. Goat's Head Soup by the Rolling Stones. The Rolling Stones during this period, let's say from 68 on to It's Only Rock and Roll, 74, 75, put out some really good classic albums. You know, you've got Exile on Main Street. You've got no, I've just got total memory loss. Let It Bleed, Beggar's Banquet, Sticky Fingers. You've got all our albums, and so it's very difficult to keep up that standard. I mean, bless them, they did their best. And it could have been this or It's Only Rock and Roll, but I plumped for this album. And you just got I just think it's just a good solid album. You know, Heartbreaker on here, Angie's on here. You know, Hide Your Love, Can You Hear the Music? Dancing with Mr. D. In an album as an album itself, it's a great album. But when you compare it to the rest of the Stones back catalogue of that period, it's not up there with the classics. So that to me is a good solid mid-table album. There you go, Goat's Head Soup. 3 more to show. Siren, Roxy Music, the 5th Roxy Music album. And yes, as albums go, it's a good album, but you know, you can, in comparison to what came before it, it's not quite up there. Obviously, the best known track's "Love Is the Drug." Single, you got both ends burning. Great songs here. Just Another High's a great song. Sentimental Fool, Nightingale. But you know, in comparison to what came beforehand, it's not quite up. It's not quite up there, but it's still a good album. But it's not a great Roxy Music album. It's a good mid-table album. In fact, when I did a Roxy Music ranking video, and I'm not sure where Siren came. I'm trying to remember. I think it came quite low actually, but it was still. It's still a good album. You know, I could have named any one of those Roxy Music albums, really. Next, Rush. I had to show a Rush album in here, and I've gone for Power Windows. The 80s for Rush, some heavily drawn, synthesised what sound, the guitar, the synthesizers, keyboards came up in front, and the sort of guitar, Alex Lifeson's guitar, sort of got played, but put more into the background. So off these albums, Power Windows represents a good mid-table album. You've got opening track, The Big Money. You got Marathon, which was I always thought was great live. Mystic Ribbons, and I think the songs on this album are really good. I say it's not there with this classic 70s, and it's not up there with some of the later albums, the 90s and 2000s. I think some of those albums are a lot better than this, but it's not a bad album. I'd struggle to find that Rush did a bad album, but yeah, I think this is a good album, good mid-table album. There's not a Duff song, but there's not what you call a classic song on here, and I don't think that sort of makes it what I call a mid-table album. Okay. Next, Stranglers Raven, the 4th album from 1979. This was a bit of a long-awaited return for them. And this is where I think the band started to move direction. They were really known as being quite an aggressive sounding band up to that point. The first 3 albums, really were in your face at times, but what you see with this album was sort of change a little bit. The songs had changed. You've got, obviously the lead single was Duchess, and that signified that it changed. It was quite keyboardy, led track. The other single on here was Nuclear Device, and then you got other songs like Sha Sha Go Go, The Raven itself, and then you got something gentle, the Men in Black, and then you got something gentle like Don't Bring Harry, which was a song about heroin. Hugh Cornwell at this time was suffering quite badly with his heroin addiction. He He ended up going to jail in 1980 over it. And it signified, and I think the band was started to lose a few of their fans because of this change of sound. But I don't think it's a bad album at all. But it's not one of their great albums. But I think it's a good album, and it's certainly up there with it as their mid-table album. And finally, UFO, The Wild, the Willing and the Innocent, which came out in 1981. This was a bit of a return to form for the band. The previous album, No Place to Run, which was produced by George Martin, wasn't as good as, say, the classics. This is like the first post-Schenker album that we could say was good. Not classic, but it was good. And I could argue this was probably their last really good album. Mechanics wasn't as good. And then Pete Way left, and then I think Making Contact wasn't as good either, and the band broke up at that point. But on this album, you've got some really good songs. Long Gone, the title track, like Wild, Willing and the Innocent, It's Killing Me, Making Movies, Lonely Heart, which was the single, Couldn't Get It Right, Profession of Violence. Some really great tracks on there, and then the other tracks sort of, I think, pad it out a little bit, but while it isn't up there with the classics, it is, to me, they're a great mid-table album by the band. So there you go, VC. That is my mid-table albums. I'd like to know what you think. I'd like to see some more videos. Maybe I haven't been searching hard enough to see what other videos have been done on this thread. So thank you, James, for coming up with this idea, because I think it's a really interesting one. Sometimes you just need to do videos that just get you out of, oh, this is what I've been playing, which I have been doing since I've sort of returned to the VC. So if you're new to the channel and you like what you see, just click on the subscribe button. Thumbs up, thumbs down, love the interaction. Feel free to leave a comment. I'm going to spend today trying to get back to people I owe replies to. So VC, whatever you get up to today, for me, as the weather's lousy, I've got some cleaning fluid. I'm going to clean. Get my cleaner out and clean some albums today. But apart from that, really nothing much. But just chill out a bit on a Sunday. I think this is the time of year where you do more chilling than you do anything, because the weather is turning. Anyway, that's enough of me prattling on my future plans. Whatever you get up to, make sure it's a good one. Before I go, look after yourselves, keep spinning, and more importantly, keep smiling.